Joining us now, the author of Baddest Man, The Making of Mike Tyson, out June 3rd. If you don't have a calendar in front of you, that's tomorrow. I'm holding the book right now. Very excited to get into it. So I figured I'd talk to the author himself, one of the finest scribes in combat sports, Mark Kriegel, here on MMA Today. How you doing, Mark?
What's up, buddy? How are you? Good.
Good, good. So Mike Tyson, right? Like probably the easiest subject in combat sports to write about, right? I mean, just as bad as he was, his history, all the different transformations of him. But there's been so much written about him. What made you say, okay, there's still part of his story that's yet to be truly told correctly?
To me, it was the most difficult assignment in combat sports because there's been so much about him. Everyone has an opinion. I covered him as a kid, and the question is, as you've identified, what the hell do you say about Tyson? I started covering him as a police reporter. Like my first assignment, I'm dating myself here, and my first assignment was like summer of '88. Get up to Harlem. He just got into a fight with Mitch Green and Dapper Dan's. Like I thought Dapper Dan's was a club, but what I was seeing was, and I didn't know it at the time, was a guy whose life was coming apart. And I think that he fought Spinks, which was billed as a fight of the century. And Spinks was a great fighter. It's just that Tyson destroyed him in 91 seconds. He did that despite having, and I'm not speaking clinically now, but he was breaking down. I mean, the demands on him, he's 21 years old. He's barely 21. Were breaking him down. Later on, I became a sports columnist. And I probably wrote more bad stuff about Tyson than anybody because our careers were contiguous. And by the time I got the column, he was in awfully bad shape. So I covered his rape trial. I covered his emergence from jail. I covered all the stuff with Don King. And the publisher said, "Would you consider Tyson?" First thing I said was like, "There's no way in hell." And I started thinking about it. A friend of mine says, your first duty as a writer is never to give money back because I owe the publisher some money. So in all seriousness, I started thinking, is there a way to reinterpret him? And I started thinking about what he had survived. Now I'm an older guy. I'd gotten my ass kicked too. You look at people and you certainly look at fighters differently. And I look at the stuff that he survived, the death of a child, the kind of fame that will kill you, like Elvis, boxing, Don King, the untimely demise of his mother, the absence of a father, incarceration, booze, coke, on and on and on. And I figured the idea that he's here now, past the time that he could have ever envisioned, to me signified there was something virtuous in just having survived. And I think it's this way in MMA too. It's certainly this way in boxing. The tragedy almost inevitably comes in the third act when the guy or the girl stops fighting, right? What the hell do I do? I've been fighting all my life. What do I do with myself? Who am I? And Tyson had this unprecedented renaissance in the third act, and he's become beloved. He's like the avatar of bro culture now. And not only could I not have anticipated him being alive, I couldn't have anticipated this.
Because when you look, I mean, it's hard to think of a more kind of iconic
Mhm.
athlete in American culture or worldwide culture than Mike Tyson. And just like you mentioned, like just essentially a terrible person in his history with the things he's done. And obviously he's a product of his environment. A lot of things were out of his control, and he was and you're kind of a product of what he came from. But like you mentioned, this renaissance, this third act, like people have forgotten that, he went to prison for sexual assault and all these things. It's like, was this something that a great PR firm kind of figured out for him? Did he figure it out for himself? Did he kind of stumble backwards into it? Like, how did this transformation happen?
I don't think he was a terrible person. I think that he was a contradictory person, like most of us are. Just with Tyson, everything's writ so large. it's so nuts. But it wasn't scripted,
Hmm.
and it wasn't an accident either. I mean, if you go back to if you dial back a few months ago to this Jake Paul thing, and I know people goof on it, but again, the last act of a fighter's life is the guy supposed to be like busted out and maybe if he's lucky, like a casino greeter or something like that, parking cars. And Tyson, I think that there were 108 live views on that live stream that Netflix got. And I submit that Jake Paul, who's a pretty good promoter actually from my perspective, could only have done those kind of numbers with Tyson, even at 58 years old. And the seeds of that, the reason why he's, I think, the most lucrative ever attraction in the history of combat sports are in this book. All the ingredients that went into making him were one of one. No other fighter was built like that. No, what they bake the cake with,
Hmm.
those those ingredients will never come together again, and they're so addictive and so seductive that we're still paying money to watch them.
Yeah. So what went into this book? Like how many hours did you sit with them? How many people did you talk to? Like what was the depth of how you had to get this thick book that I'm holding in my hand written?
Right. I never I write what I write. I try never to do the as told to, and there are two pretty voluminous volumes of autobiography that Tyson has done. They're pretty they're painfully honest and they're exhaustive. So every book I've ever done, I'm going my own way. We spoke a couple times on the phone, mostly to get ground rules. I understood his story.
Mhm.
I wanted to retrace my steps and what happened in that swirl, that craziness around him.
Mhm.
So we spoke twice, but mostly just to establish ground rules. The biggest thing I took away from our conversations, I mean, there were a couple things. I wanted his blessing. I said, hey, listen, I'm going to be calling people who know you. You know, he goes, you got my blessing. And typically what they would do was call his wife Kiki, and she would say, yeah, it's okay to tell Mark. I had no expectation that he was going to be, that he was going to retell his story solely for my benefit, gratis. Um, but I think that his version of things is known well. What I wanted to do was excavate the origin story and answer why are we so addicted to this guy. One of the things I did post to him that he did push back on was this story of, it's almost a fable, of Tyson, the 13-year-old rescued from juvenile detention, and Cus D'Amato, the great but sort of eccentric trainer who got him out and began to school him. D'Amato was a darling of the influential writers, columnists, newspaper columnists in New York. So he was already a charming figure with some cachet. And the fable that was written about cussing the kid was absolutely irresistible. You had a trainer who had fought the mob, and he gets this kid out of prison, and together they're going to, he's going to produce the greatest heavyweight ever. Um, that story wasn't entirely honest. It certainly lacked, nuance. But when I told Tyson, I said, I'm not really sure D'Amato necessarily did you a favor. You're taking a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid out of prison, you put him under hypnosis, you tell him he's a scourge from God. I'm not sure that's really like the most healthy thing to do. And he takes some umbrage at that. And I say, Mike, he wasn't like, the normal kid. All right, we'll get you in the gym. We'll see what you got. Maybe we'll put you in the Golden Gloves, or maybe we'll turn you pro one day. Who knows? One day you could be a champ kid. Okay, that's the normal thing. But from the beginning, D'Amato is telling him, you're going to be the youngest and the greatest of all time. And that's a lot of pressure for a kid, no matter how tough he is. But Tyson turns around and says, well, didn't I? Because of me, he will live forever. And I think his point is well taken. The question is, like, at what price?
Hmm. What was the biggest surprise or like the story you didn't even see coming in your, in your work making this book? Because again, his story's been told so many times, but you uncovered so many other rocks, flipped over so many things. What was one thing that you're like, wow, I had never heard that before, and that knocked my socks off?
Hmm. There's a lot of stuff. There's a scene with Rosie Perez that brings tears to my eyes, where he hits on her, and Mike's not used to hearing the word no, and she shuts him down. Like, Mike, come on, be serious. And I say to her, "How did?" And she's like, "Sit down, pal." I said, "Well, how did that happen? What was his reaction?" He just sat down like a little kid, and we became the best of friends. And I loved him from that moment. I said, "But how did you know you could shut him down like that?" And she says, "You know the phrase like game knows game."
Hmm.
Oh, she says to me, "Well, damage knows damage." They had both been hurt as kids, um, and I thought that answer just absolutely blew me away. The other thing that comes through really, really strong, no matter where I am as Sirens, man, I'm sorry, but is this look for his, he's always looking for his mother. And I don't mean to like psychoanalyze the guy, but it's pretty clear that his mother dies before he becomes Mike Tyson. And he can never really prove to her, like, hey, Ma, I'm the champ. I became a hero. I became this. I became rich. I became that. Um, and something in her, shortly after he's born, breaks in her. Her husband or the man she's living with splits, and she falls apart. She breaks. And Mike, it's not only that Mike can never fix that. I think that in Mike's mind, he exacerbates that, but he never gets to the point where he can show his mom that he did well, that he was a success. And it follows him up all the way until, like, certainly in middle life. There's this one scene I have in there where he's seeing a shrink, and the shrink has to go somewhere. He says, "Listen, I'm not going to be able to treat you anymore." And he says to her, "Hey, listen, that's okay, but I've been thinking." This is a guy like early 2000s, on the cusp of whatever, 40 years old. He's a really grown man now. He says that yeah, I understand, but I was thinking, um, what I really need is a mother. Could you be my mother? And that thing goes so deep. That hurt is like, I think that's a hurt, that's a hole that he could never fill, probably until he got his current wife, Kiki.
Hmm.
Again, I don't mean to sound like a shrink, but
Yeah.
I know, and I think from covering fighters, that all that craziness, whatever that dysfunction is, it has in their past, a lot of it has to do with making them fighters in the first place. The thing is, when you walk around with it your whole career, how do you fix it? And after you're done, what the hell do you do with it?
Well, I think that's what makes combat sports athletes such
Yep.
intriguing figures is no matter what layer, no matter how deep you get into that person, they're intriguing, right? Just the most just like the very first thing you know about him is you see Mike Tyson knocking people out on the screen, right? If that's all you know about him, you're engaged. You hear him talk, you hear his story, you get something very, very, no matter how deep you
Yep.
dig or how shallow you dig, there's something so enamoring. I think Mike Tyson was the epitome of that. No matter how little or how much you know about Mike Tyson, you never got too much.
No, but RJ, you said something really interesting. First of all, in terms of him, and I look at it like I would look at any combat sports figure like a wrestler. What do you need to do? What did he or she do to get over? And that's part of the game. Sometimes it's just your talent. Other times it's how you talk or how you handle the mic. But there's a moment, and oftentimes it has to do with the dysfunction in your past that connects you with the audience. Either they're going to hate you, love you, doesn't matter, but they're not going to remain neutral. And Mike had certain very, very distinct things. You mentioned the knockouts and the way that he was knocking people out in succession. And they weren't all bums. They weren't all tomato cans. I mean, he fought 15 times in the lead up to his first title. You try to get a kid to do that today. Like, there's no way. He's a 20-year-old kid. Actually started out at 19 when that streak started. That'll never happen. But it's the quality of the knockouts, the way that they put VCR tapes in the hands of every local sports anchor in the country. They use the technology. And the other thing, you touched on this too, when you stick the microphone in front of his face, you hear a voice that doesn't quite match the knockouts, and you stop and you go, "Holy shit! Like, who is that? What did he say?" And then it's what he's saying. I'm Alexander. I'm this. I'm that. I was trying to push the nose up to his brain. You turn around, you stop. Whoever said that before? And if it was a wrestler, just for the sake of argument, you would say, "Oh my God, these are the greatest promos ever." But they were real. And they did. And again, one of the reasons we remain addicted to him today is because that stuff back then made such a deep impression that had never been seen before. A guy never accumulated that many knockouts on video before. No one ever talked like that. When they stuck the mic in front of him, you don't know what he was going to say. So you stopped. It was appointment viewing. And what he did in those early years for HBO was not unlike what Tony Soprano did a decade later in helping the network like be supreme in that 18 to 49-year-old male demographic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a bottomless pit of hunger for all things Mike Tyson. Can't wait to dive into this book. Before we let you go, though, old heads will remember you probably did the very first long form article on the UFC when you did
very proud of that
piece on Tank Abbott back in
Tank Abbott.
Yeah, yep, Tank Abbott, right? I mean, you talk about intriguing figures.
I always wanted to know. Yeah, I thought Tank. That was pre Dana.
Mm-hmm.
It was pre Dana. It was pre weight classes. So you'd have like guys in gis and guys in underwear. And I remember Tank fighting. I think it was Dan Severn in the final. They were just kind of rolling around. But I remember asking him, and like hanging out with him was kind of dangerous. I really liked the guy, but at any moment, it's like a match could be lit and everyone could go. And I'm like, yo, I hope it ain't going to be me because I ain't built for this. And I remember asking him, so it'd be like a karate guy versus a taekwondo guy versus an American wrestler versus, Hoist Gracie and a gi. It was crazy. I said, well, what's your discipline? He goes, oh, and I think he was sipping a beer. Oh, my style, my fighting style. Yeah. He goes, bar can do. And he was so smart. I said, like, I'm looking for like, well, what the same kind of stuff I'm talking to you about. Like, what made you so nuts? What made you, so violent? And he goes, what, you want me to tell you like my mom burned me with cigarettes or something like that? I said, well, something, tell me like why you like this. And by the way, completely charming and smart. And he says, nah, man, it was none of that. He goes, I just love to fight, man. I'll always remember that.
Yeah, you always say like MMA fighters, they got to have a loose screw, but loose in the right direction.
Yeah,
right?
well,
you got to be the right kind of crazy. The book, Baddest Man, The Making of Mike Tyson, out June 3rd, available everywhere, right? Go wherever you get your books.
I certainly hope so, man.
Yeah. Mark Kriegel here on MMA Today. Really appreciate your time, Mark.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Really appreciate it, man. Take care.